Labors of Love. Today marks the first Sunday of the 5-week sermon series, God at Work. Isn't that appropriate that we start on our Labor Day weekend? So, God at Work walks us through the Epistle of James. And I'll ask you to bear with me this morning as I do have to give you some background information for us on James. Interestingly, James's writings borrow heavily from Leviticus 19, which we read and studied last week together. There's a plethora of essays and books examining James's close relationship to this text. Dorothy Walker Brown, where's Dorothy? There she is. She gets a shout out this week because she heeded my command last Sunday to read over Leviticus 19, and her exclamation was relayed to me, and it was something akin to, God is not kidding around. Dorothy's right. God is not kidding around. I wish I had looked it over a little more closely before we went to print, but James begins with an intimate warning that for some reason the lectionary editors decided we didn't need to hear. James continues through the letter and cautions, don't be misled, my brothers and sisters, in verse 16. Our reading, you will note, begins at verse 17. So this letter of encouragement is written to the people of Israel who have lost their right to their homeland. They're dispersed. They are refugees living in other lands. James, as you can clearly hear, is instructing them, guiding them in the ways of this new Judaism. And in case you aren't aware of who this James is, he's the brother of Jesus. That sure gives him, in my opinion, a lot of street cred. But apparently this street cred was not extended by Martin Luther's opinion, who thought James's epistle was weak. He actually called it a work of straw. But John Wesley understood James's letter, according to Wesley's journal, as a remedy against the general temptation of leaving off good works in order to increase faith. John also observed that during the time of this letter, Christianity was rife with rash judging and evil speaking, among other things. As I have studied John Wesley's life, I can say his conviction to good works followed from the last verse of our text. True devotion, the kind that is pure and faultless before God the Father, is this: to care for the orphans and widows in their difficulties and to keep the world from contaminating us. You can see that I put up a little something for our visual interest this morning. And as you follow along, just let your eyes wander over to our visuals. Now, John was as contaminated by the world as most of us, but he was fully committed to loving his neighbor, the widow and the poor and the orphan. All right, so I think we've got some background laid out on James. Right? Now, I am touched by the imagery of God giving birth to us through Jesus. How by that labor, God chose to give us birth by his true word. The true word being Jesus. And James goes on to say, and here is the result. We are like the first crop from the harvest of everything he created. How beautiful we are. The first crop of everything God created. This imagery, for me, harkens back to the first creation story in Genesis. Then God said, let us make humanity in our image, to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on earth. God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. This labor is a gift of life, a gift of love. God labored on our behalf to offer us this gift of love. And ranching being such a big part of Wyoming livelihood, and I know ranchers are listening this morning, birth is not something to be taken lightly. Then God gave us another gift. We were then first crop of the harvest. The first crop is associated with the first fruits, which were placed at the sanctuary as an offering at Harvest Festival, or Shavuot, which we now call in the Christian calendar Pentecost. This is a God who, through James, is moved to reassure a people who are caught up in the midst of calamitous change, not of their making. Like a mother hen, this God is keeping them close, hovering over the brood. So the next question for James is, what do we do with this gift of life? We are gracious in its use. Out of our gratitude for the labor of love, this is our life in God. We reciprocate. We care for the orphans and the widows in their difficulties. But there are many who are orphaned. And if we're trying to decide who to care for, we can think of all of the ways a person might be orphaned. Through financial instability, through loneliness, through family crisis or familial discord, through addiction to pain pills, alcohol, pornography, shopping, or even to technology. All of these and any others you can throw into that pot, and as you think about it, orphan us from being the first fruits of God. The mirror to which James refers back to us our life as it is seen from afar. And as one theologian describes it, it's a mirror that reflects back to the viewer all of God's grace, love, peace, and joy that have been sown through a person's life. But then we will walk away and forget the one who continues to labor over us. He says, what our appropriate response would be instead would be to live in that grateful response and to express that gratitude outwardly, to be a doer, and not just a hearer, as James has named it. So the other day, as I was reading in the pleasantness of the day, our weather's been so beautiful, all of that warmth and light and a gentle, cool breeze, the FedEx truck pulled up to our house. And as you will hear, it was like a special delivery from God, right to all of us. So as is common for this community, the driver and I got to chatting, me leaning on the fence, him standing in the driveway. I began with commenting, on a day like this, it must be nice to be out delivering packages, getting in and out of the truck. And he agreed wholeheartedly. As usual, talk came around to the house being the parsonage, how Michael and Heather lived there, and how loved they were by the community. And then to, oh no, you're the new pastor? I'll tell you, some people become oddly disquieted when learning you're a pastor. You can see them flipping through the pages of the conversation, wondering what the heck they've said. To reassure him that there was nothing untoward or offensive spoken, we got to talking about what I consider the pinnacle of Christianity. Do y'all know what it is yet? It starts with a capital L. He began to relate a story about two fellows at the RV park where he vacations. One of these fellows was liked by everyone, just a great guy. Then this gentleman died. Everyone was mourning his passing, trying to cope with missing someone who brought them a lot of joy. The second fellow, by his own admission, a good Christian, was running around the campsite asking if anyone had ever heard the first fellow express a belief in God. Loved by everyone, but the second fellow felt it was his duty to place doubt on whether this fellow was saved. So what do you think, given the fruits of his life? James is asking us to look hard at the rules we follow and why we might follow those. How do they serve our purpose or that of the evil one, as opposed to the purpose of good? Remember the mirror. If we can always keep that vision before us, we would know deep in our hearts that our lives are being tended like a garden. But it's our garden, and occasionally we let weeds creep in. The second fellow's queries may have been born of some anxiety, but they cast a shadow of doubt on the goodness of the first fellow's life. I think this is where we could put to good use, John Wesley's simple rule, do no harm. This story illustration brings us back to Wesley's suggestion that at the time James was penning his letter, it was a time of rash judging and evil speaking. God doesn't need our rash judging. God's truly up to the task of judging, I assure you. We know this because Jesus told us so. So I am wondering if the reason the second fellow brought up the question of salvation because he was tickled by that deadly sin, envy. So this morning I'm going to read an article for you about envy. And of course, this was what I was going to try to show you. So I would encourage you to look at it on either Facebook or on our website. So this is another type of envy that would have amazing impact if everyone was or were tickled by it, and it's called benign envy. Benign envy is good-hearted envy, and we'll hear its effects. I'll close on this auspicious Labor Day weekend when we lay to rest a fruitful servant of this country with this. Envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. Advertisers use envy to push us to buy products we don't need. In social media, envy carves out that hollow feeling. Envy is to be avoided. But this week, David Letterman introduced me, and this is John Dickerson on CBS, introduced me to a different envy, the envy that leads to action. His envy for people who made a difference in the world drew him to former President Jimmy Carter and Habitat for Humanity. For the last 14 years, he's clicked on a tool belt and swung the hammer building houses. He says it changed his life. I'm tearing up and getting a little goosebumps. The first time we did it, says David Letterman, everybody came up to me and said, "Oh, thank you, oh, thank you, oh, thank you." And I said, "You're crazy, you're crazy. Thank you." You would get that from any of these people in the helmets building now, says Letterman. They are indebted to the president, to Carter, to Habitat for Humanity, giving them the opportunity to help people. Because when you help others, you just feel better about yourself. This is called benign envy. The desire to be better when we see someone doing something good. This was the theme of many of the tributes to Senator John McCain. People felt called to be their best because his example drew people to, as he used to say, serve a cause greater than self-interest. Tomorrow, we had yesterday's memorial service for Senator McCain will perhaps stir the kind of benign envy that John Dickerson says his mother used to feel at funerals. After hearing the deceased described with words like character, generosity, and love, she would leave the funeral inspired to go out and live her life that way. So we need more envy in the world. Whether you envy John McCain, Jimmy Carter, David Letterman, or Mom, the envy that leads us to action is not a sin, but salvation. Amen.